I'm doing this. I think I want to do this a little bit more, where I only launch OBS when I'm like immediately ready to stream, so I don't have to go back and forth between the scenes I've made. Let me just post on Discord. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's start up the Mario Kart Retro Rewind. I know there's some viewers of mine who are European, so there's some stuff I have lined up today that I think they would appreciate. Either way, from an American, this is like for an American, excuse me, not from an American, but like for an American, European politics are still relevant because all politics are relevant to America, and American politics are relevant to everybody. I will update. I think there was an update. Um, But I know everybody likes to do the everybody has a little bit of a regional preference where they're like, "Hey, that's me," or "That's like right next to where I live," or whatever it is. So figured I'd shout that out real quick. Let's go to the Retro Rewind announcements. Is the update dropped yet? Coming Sunday. And then no, it doesn't seem like it has. Okay. So the update, it's possible the update could end up dropping while I'm streaming, in which case you guys will know because the servers will go down or something. Uh, but until such time that happens, I'm just going to launch the game and we will play. Uh, okay. So I'm going to minimize that for now. I'll just go from memory what I've been doing the past couple days, what else been going on, what I think is interesting, etc., etc. First, I would like to get in game, I think. Retro WFC. I think it's a mock bike day today. I don't think I'm feeling the Flame Runner. Yeah. I think it's time to go back to the classic. Me mock bike. Yeah. That. That's me, alright. Okay, so now we're in game. Politics, am I right, guys? I finally finished a like reading kick that I had been on. Um I read a couple studies about affordable housing a little while back. Very informative. But then there was one other study that I had queued up that I kind of forgot about, like unintentionally ended up putting off. And I finally read that yesterday. I read through it. I took notes. Very short study. It was only like 8 pages, but I think it was very worth my time. It was about rents in the Soviet Union. This was a study from the 1980s about, well, housing rent in the Soviet Union. Also, stuff about like how the legal system works around that, what kind of what the housing landscape looks like there, what kind of problems existed at the time. Like I said, from the 1980s, so the Soviet Union still existed, and I think I learned a lot from this study. Like some of which was directly from the study, some of which was from the like dissecting the bias of the author writing the study. Now, obviously, any study you cannot have an unbiased study, but it's possible to have more or less pronounced degrees of bias. I tend to shy away from mid 20th century literature about the Soviet Union for this reason. If it's early enough that it's before World War II, then I will be less hesitant uh, because the well was like a lot less poisoned. But at any time after World War II and before the 1980s, I feel like there's so much well poisoning from from the Soviet Union's end, because anybody who's remotely left leaning and writing about the Soviet Union is going to be glazing them. And then also from the United States' end, because anybody who's writing from like a like somewhat negative perspective on the Soviet Union is going to be so negative that they just become Adolf Hitler or something. You know, like the discourse was very, very toxic for a long time regarding the Soviet Union and like anything that they did, which is not to say the Soviet Union didn't do horrible things. They did, but there's this consent manufacturing, like the Cold War uh McCarthyism did a lot to discredit actually both factions for any academic critique that could be levied. And academia is usually where the critiques are a lot more reasonable. So I think the well poisoning was like especially bad there. But this study ended up being okay. You know, like to put it simply, if it were from the 1950s, if it were a study from the 1950s, I would be like, oh shit, we're about to get either a full-on tanky Stalin supporter or like a Nazi, and there's very little in between on what kind of academic literature you could see about the Soviets from the 50s and 60s. Um, Whereas, like I said, it up to the 1930s, and then after like the 1970s and 80s, things were a bit more balanced in their perspective. Anyways, the content of the study itself was, like I said, it was about rents. How were rents set in the Soviet Union? Obviously, the Soviet Union, while I don't believe it was very socialist, you know, that requires a lot more details. But they did a lot of central planning, a lot of centrally planned stuff. Some of which was really cringe, some of which was actually really really cool. And this applied to the housing sector as well. This applied to housing and construction and stuff. Some of the, you know, there's like the good and the bad and the ugly with regards to Soviet era rent policy making. Apparently it was written into Soviet law uh, that you couldn't set rents at a level above 10% of the workers' paychecks, right? Like that was the law. Um, and this had a, like, there was like a companion piece to this where it was like, oh, for every square meter, so this is more than a square foot, but like for every square meter of space, you can't charge more than 35 or like some amount of kopecks per month. A kopeck is like a cent, so like 100 kopecks is equal to 1 ruble. So for like fuck, I don't know what square footage translates to in terms of square meterage. But the apartments were quite small in the Soviet Union. That was one of the big flaws of I think the Soviet housing system, is how small the apartments were. Um, but the law basically held that, like, okay, there's this federalized rent control system. You can't charge rents above this level for like certain classes of people. It had a lot of flaws in which, like, you could tell there was like a scaling system which really just engendered certain class structures in the Soviet Union. Not very socialist or communist of them, I must say. But regardless, it did work. It did exactly what it was intended to, which is keep rents down. The unfortunate thing is it also, like, there weren't much in the way of organic incentives to, I guess you could say, to build more housing, but to build housing that was like up to code. A lot of the codes and stuff, building codes, construction law, and whatever, was very out of date in the Soviet Union, even by Russian and like Soviet standards. Standard of living was lower, etc., etc. So it was a mixed bag with some very strong positives and some very strong negatives. But I want to focus on the positives for a second. You know, we have that rent control. But you also have what else was it? It was like there was still wiggle room in this rent control sort of thing. You couldn't charge more than, like, I think it was 35 or 40 kopecks per square meter. You also couldn't charge less than 20, you know? So there was still a bit of room, and and stuff to do calculations based off of the proximity that people had to certain goods and services in the city, and things of that nature. And then suffice it to say, like, even on a meager Soviet paycheck, like for people earning something like 150 rubles per month, 10 rubles per month, which is about what the rent would have been, like 10 to 20 rubles for somebody earning between 100 and 300 rubles per month, that's about 10%, or a little bit less than 10% of their paychecks. And in fact, the stat sheets that I saw in this study corroborated that, where there was in most years the rent didn't actually exceed 10% of anybody's paycheck, for like the lower levels of workers in the Soviet Union. There was one year where they exceeded 10% by a very slight margin, but I think that speaks to a degree of success. Now, what are some of the downsides? Well, the downsides were, number one, these apartments weren't super high quality. Like, I think I've talked about the compaction and the sort of communal apartments in the Soviet Union before. They were either the kommunalkas from the Lenin days and the Stalin days, or they were Khrushchevkas or Brezhnevkas, from, well, Khrushchev and Brezhnev's days in charge of the Soviet Union. Those were significant upgrades, and on some part, I'm actually really willing to, like, let some of that slide. That might not make a ton of sense, but, like, you gotta understand, the Soviet Union industrialized straight from, like, pre-modern serfdom and peasantry. Like, there wasn't this intermediate, like, agrarian capitalism that you saw in places like the United States and places like France and Britain. Like, they skipped a step, basically. So the standard of living in Russia was so backwards that even Khrushchevkas and Brezhnevkas represented a massive, massive increase in the standard of living, And I think at the time, in the 1980s, that still is something that you have to take into account, because, like, God, even today, a lot of Russians don't have running water. Or electricity, for that matter. But then nowadays, I think that you could very accurately levy that that's like a pretty big failure, that a lot of Russians still don't have those modern amenities in 2024, because enough time has passed that, like, okay, look, there's so much time and resources available to you here that you could have fixed the problem, but you didn't. That's one thing. Space restrictions, obviously the building standards not being that great. That can partially be explained by rapid industrialization and things like that. But at the same time, it's like, it's subject to a similar thing. In fact, let me bring up my notes so I can see some of the themes that I, like, well, took note of. Oh yeah, it was also really funny to see it. Like, it was actually genuinely shocking. I don't know how this went. This might be something I read on in the intermediate to more distant future. For an entire year in the Soviet Union, rent had been abolished. I'm not kidding. From the year 1921 to the beginning of the year 1922, for a full year, there was no rent in the Soviet Union. Genuinely, like, don't even know how that works. Like, really impressive for like the fledgling Soviet Union. I among with many other socialists who are well read on the issue will probably argue that the best data and like or best data, probably the best potential that the Soviet Union had was in its early days, because that potential got squandered relatively quickly. That was one thing that was really, really interesting. But as the authors pointed out, for how low the rents were in the Soviet Union, that was just in monetary terms. They explained that, like, the income levels in the Soviet Union compared to the United States were quite low, very low. The standard of living was a lot lower. Partially this can be explained by the very recent industrialization and how big of a gap they had to bridge, but it's also partially explained by the fact that Russia's just a lot less wealthy than the United States, and by the fact that Russia ultimately was not socialist. The USSR was not socialist, it was still capitalist. People were still working for a wage that was paid in money, and surplus labor was being extracted from them for profit. Just instead of like a market economy where you have private non-state bosses, you have a command economy where your bosses are still unelected and still extract that surplus labor, that surplus value, but now they are in the employ of an unelected state. So they it's a version of capitalism where the influence and the interests of the capital class have been much more completely rolled into the interests of the state and the artifice of the state. Not a great system. So I was able to draw from that, okay, rents are low, but so are incomes. Incomes are really low. And there's this problem where even though the rent in the Soviet Union looks to be really low, if you compare the working hours, here, look, let me scroll on my notes. Yeah, here we go. If you adjust for the rate of wages in the Soviet Union and the United States he uses the year 1950 as a benchmark, then 1 square meterage of dwelling space, like 1 square meter of an apartment or a house, on average would cost about 27 minutes of labor in both the United States and the Soviet Union. The number was almost exactly the same. So that was interesting because to me it indicated, number one, that okay, the incomes were too low, right? Or I shouldn't just say number one. That's probably it. If you had an actual socialist system, then people would be keeping proportionally more of their income. They would be, owning the place in which they work, and there would be very little, if any, surplus value that gets extracted from people. Because business is well, if a business is profitable in one country, it'll probably also be similarly profitable in another country, unless it's strictly contingent on natural resources. But I thought that was interesting because the authors draw a connection that I think is somewhat erroneous. I don't think the authors should have drawn the connection that they did, because what they said was, aha, so this indicates that, obviously, the standard of living is higher in the United States. This indicates that the Soviet Union needs more private ownership, which is not what happens. We've seen what happens in the United States when you have that model of private ownership of housing. You get the housing crisis because housing gets, progressively more expensive. It's treated as a financial asset that appreciates over time. It literally, the addition of private ownership and investment into the housing market simply increases the rents and makes the crisis worse. Now, instead of the incomes being too low, now the rents are also too high. Does that make sense? It's like in the United States, rents are too high. Not even a question. In the Soviet Union, incomes were too low. But what the authors are suggesting here is that in addition to the incomes being too low, they should make the rents higher. Or at least introduce these circumstances that would drive rents to increase over time. Right? So I actually, when I was reading this article, I was very unsatisfied with the conclusions of the author when they said that, yeah, you have these problems in the renting system. Of course, sometimes that's actually that's actually kind of a necessary feature of a command economy. It's what makes command economies so flawed and volatile is that you don't have any really ready-made mechanisms to adjust to differing circumstances based on region or locality and stuff like that. Um, so on that front, to take a stab at that component of the problem where rents are somewhat inflexible relative to, like, I don't know, local circumstances where, like, there might be more or less housing demand. Because remember, like, the command economy also contributed to there not being enough housing being built in the Soviet Union, as did poor building codes. Buildings were not quite up to snuff. It was hard for people to get them built. They would have to be torn down and rebuilt because the construction was too iffy. If I had to take a stab at the rent itself, then I would say then that this actually doesn't go far enough in terms of, like, setting rents. I think the fact that there was private ownership at all of dwellings is the problem, because that means that you have housing as a financial asset, which the price could thus increase as a result of that, right? And besides, for owning a house, right? If you're owning a house, you don't actually own it. The bank owns it, and that ownership is guaranteed by the state. They're simply renting it to you long term, like over the course of 30 or 40 years, depending on your mortgage. At which point, once you've paid off that mortgage, then you are the owner of the house. Like, my parents own, quote unquote, this house, but they don't actually. The bank could seize the house at any time. This is the bank's house. My parents have to pay mortgage. Homeowners in the United States and anywhere, you have to pay mortgage. You don't own the house. You're renting it until the bank has decided you've paid all your mortgage payments. Now we'll give you the deed to the house. And that deed is guaranteed by the state. It would be just as easy. In fact, it would be more efficient for the state to directly own the house, because this is already an exercise of state power in determining who gets to live where, right? It would be just as easy and way more efficient to have the state own the house so that they can in-house so much of the administration and expenses that they're otherwise using for working with the bank and subsidies and whatever. That can bring the rent down substantially. It's like the bank just acts as a middleman between you and the state. Cut out the middleman. That way, you pay, like, dirt cheap rent for your house, and you could pay that rent for 100 years. It probably would not come even close to the mortgage payment over 30 years. If the rents here are anything to go by. There's one other thing that I took notes on here. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. The renting scheme in the Soviet Union, the renting system still had private ownership. The author refers to, like, oh, why should a private homeowner or a private building owner be forced to rent at such low return? And therein lies the problem. See, they're worried about the kind of returns that the owner of one of these properties would make. My concern is that you have that owner at all. You have a private owner who's worried about making returns on a perceived investment. Like I said, it would be just as easy and way more efficient to, like, cut out the middleman, because with this system of ownership where you have a lot of rent control policies which have brought down the rents quite successfully, like in the Soviet Union, you're just effectively having the state subsidize the landlord, right? And trust me when I say the state subsidizing the landlord is the last fucking thing that you want. Oops. Anyways, I feel like that was kind of meandering. I feel like that taught me quite a bit about the housing system. Oh yes, there was one more thing. There's one thing I wanted to mention as well. It was about the centrally planned economy. I think that having like authorities tied to the government, having public authorities be in charge of housing is a fundamentally, like, at its core, it's a good idea, right? The problem is, I think the Soviet Union had really bad execution of what was otherwise a pretty good idea. Where in Soviet law, they actually had all the rent policy being administered at a state and federal level. So, like, the USSR was kind of like a sort of federalist system where you had at the very top it was the USSR, and then you had the individual Soviet republics, and then you had the cities, towns, and like oblasts and whatever, the smaller and smaller regions. I would say that, like, to take a stab at that, you'd probably want a housing policy to be set at the local level, and basically you federalize that on up, so that the federal government sets very broad guidelines, the state governments get much more specific, and then the local governments are in charge of, like, the on the ground administration and overseeing the building codes and things like that, and the construction. Although you could do some of that at the federal and state level as well. You know, it's just at that point, it's a matter of having the state be a democratically elected entity. This is another thing that the Soviet Union suffered from. It was very authoritarian. In fact, some would even argue totalitarian. I see no reason really to disagree with those assessments, given the kinds of surveillance and crackdowns on dissidents and like favoritism, censorship, etc., that was present in the Soviet Union at the time. But picture if you had a Soviet Union with a similar sort of federalized structure, but that was instead administered democratically, where you elected representatives. None of this Vanguard Party bullshit, but instead you elected the I don't know, county assayors, the mayors, or whatever, and then that was how you administered housing policy. Then congratulations, you have actually achieved socialism in the housing policy. Where you have a democratically elected public authorities setting housing rules and regulations and guidelines and whatever, and public, basically like government construction efforts being dedicated towards building public housing. You have these regulations be regulated, updated, etc., etc. And that way you can get the best of both worlds. You can get the low rents like the Soviet Union had, but you can also, through a democratic state and through democratic ownership of enterprises, you can also have people keeping a larger share of their incomes, whether that be through money or through, some Marxian concept like labor vouchers or whatever it is. And basically you just, as much as you can, you want to cut private ownership of dwellings out of the equation. And you generally don't want to use the highest level of central planning for that. Unfortunately, without a vanguard, you're just repeating the same failure of the Paris Commune, Spanish anarchists, and getting shot quick. That is a consideration for sure. I don't think the Vanguard Party is a good idea. It certainly, at the time, you could have made some arguments to justify it. Nowadays, I don't actually think a Vanguard Party is necessary on that front. Look at what happened in Bolivia. And what is happening actually everywhere in Latin America. You could argue some of these are social democrats, but a lot of them are avowed leftists and socialists getting elected into government. And the United States, if they even attempt a coup at all, fails. Remember, in 2019, the U.S. attempted a coup of Evo Morales. That crazy fucking lady with the giant-ass Bible was president for 1 year, and then Evo Morales came back. The coup was a massive failure because it didn't actually oust the socialists. Yeah, Agnes, there you go, thank you. It didn't actually oust the socialists from power in a meaningful capacity. In the case of Brazil, this was an unprecedented move by the United States. It was a hotly contested election. The right wing in Brazil, the far right, was doing all sorts of interference, and the U.S. stepped in on the side of the left and guarantee the stability of Lula's government to a degree by establishing that tie, and caused Bolsonaro to flee to Florida, where he now lives in the hospital or something. I don't know. On those grounds, I think a vanguard party no longer necessary for like some defense from foreign enemies against like a socialist ideology project or whatever. You know? What else was I gonna say? There was one more thing that I think I was getting to. I'm sure I'll remember it in time. Oh yeah, I remember now. The 5-year plan. I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm going to think about it before responding. Yeah, look, that's fine. I just don't, I think that there are a lot of failures of the Vanguard Party that we should learn from, and I don't think, see, the problem that I have with the Vanguard Party in principle, right? It is going to be like kind of necessary to retain some of the structure from a liberal democracy just because you have to start somewhere. But like having a Vanguard Party, you run a very real risk of just recreating the class structures from capitalism. That's where the sort of state capitalism in the Soviet Union was most visible, I think, or like one of the biggest elements of the state capitalism there was that like the Vanguard Party represented the interests of, well, the party, and it was like as distinct from the workers. It was just the same property relations by a different name. You know, the Vanguard Party effectively just became the owning class, and the working class was still the working class. You didn't have a resolution of the dialectic. In fact, you didn't get that, they didn't get that much closer, you know, than somewhere like, I don't know, fucking United States. I mean, I'm sure as hell it was an upgrade over Tsarist Russia. But yeah, I wanted to talk about the 5-year plan, the concept of the 5-year plan, because that's actually something that I think should be remembered as one of the biggest policy victories and one of the biggest, like, conceptual W's of the Soviet Union throughout time. Again, not that they executed them all well, because some of them were executed quite sloppily and it really didn't meet a lot of objectives. But I think the strongest case that you could make for a degree of central planning, which as much as you don't want to have your entire economy be central planning is kind of necessary to having a complex economy in the first place. The government has to get involved. A 5-year plan speaks to a degree of direction that I think is super important for a very large industrialized country like America. I think that's going a bit farther. Quality between the Politburo and the ordinary workers nowhere near as extreme as that between capitalists and workers in the West. That's true. The inequality wasn't as extreme, but the power and influence is what I'm mostly concerned with here. The income inequality can be muted or not. What I'm concerned about is the relationship to the means of production, right? In a Marxist sense, in a Marxian sense of analysis, the Vanguard Party in Russia were the owning class, and they were not elected democratically. They were, in effect, the capital owning class of Russia, or of the Soviet Union more broadly. It was, it was more than just Russia. And it didn't matter whether or not they had more like money in their pocket per se than the working class did, because they were the ones who had a say over how production went, where it was allocated. They were the ones running the economy, not the workers. They did have democratic elections, so it's not multi-party bourgeois ones. I hate to tell you this, but no, the Soviet Union did not have democratic elections. They're the kind of quote-unquote elections where, there's a implied gun to the back of your head if you don't vote for Stalin. And the fact that it was a one-party state is not doing them any favors. As much as, obviously I hate multi-party, bourgeois democracy because it just offers the illusion of choice, you do have to have more than one party, or just, not have the vanguard party be the sole agent in politics. People have different preferences. So whatever socialism, you think the USA is more democratic than China today? Objectively, yes. That's not even like a question of opinion. That's just objectively the US is more democratic than China. And I'm not going to debate this. This isn't a debate. There's a right and a wrong answer to this. What I was going to say about the 5-year plan, most Chinese people think they live in a democracy, and most Americans think the U.S. isn't democratic. And therein lies the difference between China and the United States. If you answered otherwise to that poll in China, you would have had the government on your ass and had your credit fucking frozen. Literally, like it's like the social credit meme, but not like literally social credit. They'll freeze your fucking assets if you say anything critical of Xi Jinping. There was a Chinese government official that Mehdi Hassan interviewed who literally, like, the degree to which he, like, was nakedly authoritarian and couldn't even disguise, like, the sort of authoritarianism inherent to the Chinese government was, like, very revealing. Like, when he was asked, like, can you say anything negative about Xi Jinping? Like, are you allowed to? He just said, no, you're not. Got a source for this? Yeah, you can feel free to watch the interview. You can take it from the horse's mouth. His name was, what was it? Something Gao. David Gao? Something Gao. Anyways, I'm not going to talk about that. Like I said, this isn't a debate. There is an objective right and wrong answer to this. And it is, I think, a point against both the U.S. and China that the U.S. is somehow more democratic. But what, like, Jesus, we got so derailed, or I got so derailed. I shouldn't be letting this happen. I want to get back to the concept of the 5-year plan, right? Like I said, Victor Gao said only constructive criticism should be offered. Yeah, real democratic system that you have there. All right, look, you're getting a little too spicy with it. I'm timing you out for 5 minutes, or actually that's 10 minutes. All right. Come back when you're less pro-China. See, this chat isn't a democracy, so I can do that. And that's what China does to especially to party officials, but also to just randos. The 5-year plan, I think, is a super based concept because, like, contrary to, you know, what you might see in a high school level economics textbook, you do have to have central planning to a certain degree. There's a reason that you'll see a lot of economies referred to as mixed economies, because you have some things that are subject to the market, but then the government gets involved in a lot of things. That's kind of how a complex economy works. It's so complex to the point that you can't have a single central authority be running everything, but you have to have guardrails set up. You have to have some degree of state intervention in economic policy making and objective setting and agenda setting for anything to work. You know, if you can't just do Ancapistan, right? Otherwise you get Argentina, where inflation is 1 billion% and nobody has a job, and Malay's just running around with a chainsaw or something. The United States in particular suffers from a severe lack of direction at a state and federal level, or like, I guess at any level of government. There is, like, a lot of economic stagnation and lack of direction in the United States. It's such a big problem that everybody memes on how little Congress is able to do. I finally come back from a busy vacation and this happens. Yeah, welcome back, 1v3. Good to have you. Good to have you back. Like, Joe Biden's, the Inflation Reduction Act and what it was originally going to be, the what was it? It's like the I don't remember if it had a name. It's like this $7 trillion infrastructure plan that eventually got watered down into a piddly, like, 400 billion, you know? We almost had something incredible. And that infrastructure package is something that kind of resembles a 5-year plan. In fact, it's almost more like a 10-year plan. It was going to be $7 trillion over the next 10 years to invest in all sorts of different infrastructure. Infrastructure was the name of the game. That was the name of the 10-year plan. And that kind of economic direction at the behest of a democratically elected state is really what you want in terms of, like, in America's case, revitalizing society, but in potentially in like a third world country's case, industrializing society. If you can galvanize the whole country, both economically and politically, around a set of economic objectives, where at the end of it, you can say, look at what we did. Life is better, particularly in this area, whether that be around literacy projects, education, infrastructure, health, or like housing or whatever. Like, that is an extremely strong tool that the U.S. has, through the deadlocking of the legislature and sort of the influence of corporate interests in politics that don't want anything to change or get better. The U.S. has sort of deprived itself of that policymaking tool, of the 5-year plan, right? As a concept. And within that 5-year plan, like I said, this is a mixed economy. In that 5-year plan, you have a lot of wiggle room on how state and local governments spend the money that they're given. Phonebook in Anus, thank you for the follow. I remember that name because it's so distinctive. Welcome back, comrade. In a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan like the infrastructure bill that we never ended up getting, you have a lot of wiggle room. It just says, like, okay, this money has to be spent on this kind of area of policymaking. And so then it's up to the states and the local governments how to spend that money. But ultimately, they have to spend it within certain guidelines. Like, oh, you have to spend this on housing, right? Or you have to spend this on infrastructure and like what kind of infrastructure you focus on, or like how you implement these policy objectives is up to you. You have, but like, sort of the best of both worlds, where you have a very decentralized economy with a lot of different actors at different levels that are prepared to basically come up with very locally tailored plans. But then you have a state and federal government at the larger level that are ready and willing to act to basically say, okay, the people have elected us because they are concerned about this, and this economic issue. People had concerns about American infrastructure. They still do. So we're going to craft some broad objectives that we know could theoretically be met by state and local governments. We're putting phone books in the dark side now. What happened to you? I mean, I leave you alone for 2 months and your chat just goes nuts, huh? Yeah, that's true. That's, 1v3 real moderating force here in the chat. But anyways, I think I've gushed enough. I'm sure you guys probably get where I'm coming from, that there are some really good things that the Soviet Union did, like a rare few, but there were also some really big fuck-ups. And I think 2 of those really good things were, or actually 3 of them, were public housing, rent control, and the 5-year plan as a concept, And I think the United States could benefit from implementing more of that. But then at the same time, the Soviet Union had a lot of really bad things going in it as well. The over-reliance on central planning, not enough autonomy and freedom at the sort of local level, both for government authorities and just for people, which led to a lot of like favoritism, nepotism in government. Experts that disagreed with the state kind of didn't have a whole lot of wiggle room to do anything. And then also partially just the fact that the Soviet Union wasn't all that wealthy. A lot of mistakes were made. The building codes and the laws being stagnant for a long time, also something the United States has suffered from, but it definitely didn't help their case that the laws governing rent and building codes in the 1980s in the Soviet Union had not been updated since the 1930s. That's like too long to let that stuff go unaddressed. That's probably the most policy wonkery I'll engage with on this channel, is with like affordable housing and stuff. Also, Jake LMKW, thank you very much for the follow. Welcome to the stream. I was just going over an affordable housing study that I read to sort of round out some literature I had been reading. So now you guys are mostly caught up on sort of what I did, what I did yesterday. You seem base? Well, thank you, and welcome to chat. Glad to have you here. And, you know, for me, the big thing was that, like, okay, you have to have this mixed economy. Mixed economies are probably the name of the game here. You absolutely, there are things that you absolutely should not be leaving to the market. You know, housing being one of them because of how essential it is. But then also, like, over-reliance on a federal state is also, like, it's going to be very clumsy and very blunt, and you have to leave room at the local level for different kinds of interpretations and stuff. And I think for issues of housing policy and rent, right? This is not just from the study on the Soviet Union that I read, but also from a couple other studies that I read that focused on the United States and Germany and a couple other countries. You just shouldn't have a, like, private ownership model of housing. I think that creates more problems than it solves ultimately, because number one, even in that private ownership model, you don't actually own your house. The bank owns your house through the guarantee of the state, and you're just paying rent long term until eventually one day maybe you've paid it off. And then also, since the bank or the landlord, in whichever case, is acting as a middleman between you and a state, democratically elected or otherwise, it would be just as well to cut out the middleman, because the banks, the landlords, have an interest to make a profit, and that creates a lot of perverse incentives that prevent people from having access to housing, whether it be through shortages or through prices being too high. So the state can, like, basically, you can use the power of the state to make rents dirt cheap, and have that be either subsidized if it needs to be, or just, like, reflected through taxes. We already subsidize a lot of housing in America. And instead of paying $1,500 a month in rent, you would be paying probably like $150 a month. Like, I'm not joking. The gap would in fact be that big. You know, 1,500. I wish. Yeah, look, I'm saying that for somebody who might not live in, like, as big of a city. Where I live, rents can get up to $2,000 to $3,000. It's bad. But I'm also not pulling that number, $150, out of my ass either. In this study, there were some figures referred to from the United States, so, like, historical figures on rent numbers. So I went and looked up a table. I found a table from the U.S. Census website of historical rents in the United States. Rent in my state of Virginia, the median rent in the state of Virginia was $39 a month in 1950. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $500 today. That's pretty low. That's, in fact, really low. I doubt you could find anywhere with rent that cheap that isn't, like, rent stabilized in America. It is indeed a bruh moment. And that's that $500 number, like, it, you know, inflation adjusted $500. That's with still a very problematic model of private ownership of housing, where there exist all those perverse incentives to neglect maintenance because you're not literally legally obligated to do it, to like increase rent just because you can. You know, those incentives had already been at play for some time in the United States, and even in 1950, rents were only like a third of what they are today. I think now, if you look, or maybe half, I think if you looked at the median rent for the state of Virginia in 2024, it's something like $1,000, or a little bit more than $1,000. Anyways, I'm kind of at the risk of rambling for longer than I would really like to, because I think I've mostly said everything I wanted to say about affordable housing and this study that I read recently. And with that said and done, I can now actually move on to the next thing I wanted to read, which was 2,100 according to Zillow. That's the median rent in Virginia. Holy shit. Okay, so never mind a third. That's actually a quarter of the rent that you'd be paying today in the state of Virginia. That's pretty bad. Yeah, I'm now like I feel like I am officially affordable housing's strongest warrior, and I think I'm ready to move on. Another source says 1,700, somewhere in that ballpark. Okay, yeah. So yeah, rents are fucking high. And I think now that I've read a lot about affordable housing, I've read like 3 or 4 studies on it at this rate. Actually, more like 5 or 6. I think I did some reading on it about like a year ago. I'm ready to move on to the book that I got recently. That is The Mass Psychology of Fascism. Like I said on another stream, I'm a heavy reader. Sounds interesting. Yeah. It's reading is cool. It is cool. I usually don't read for fun, but I do read for educational and academic purposes. And that's also for fun. You know? It's kind of crazy that when I was in college, right? Initially, you know, the homework obviously felt like a chore because it was homework. But then towards the end of college, I actually really started to enjoy just reading stuff. Like, I enjoyed the assignments that involved me reading and taking notes and then just talking about the stuff that I read. You know? Because I was archaeology. Well, I guess anthropology, but archaeology as a subset of that. I specialized in archaeology in the anthropology major. So I read a lot of archaeology stuff. And there's a lot of, like, there was a lot of stuff that I was interested in when I was in like, especially in the last couple years of college in my archaeology classes. Like, when people think of like, very ancient states and empires and whatever, people do not give them enough credit for how complex the economies were and how, like, in some ways they would actually crazily resemble the economies today. 1v3. Real quick, since you're a moderator, could you ban that guy that just posted about the, like, botting viewers? You just do /ban and then that person's username. Thank you. Thank you very much. What? I hit the... Okay. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, you know, ancient states, like, states in the ancient world don't get enough credit for how complex the economic structures were. In some ways, we would, like, find it quite familiar. In some ways, though, they are wildly different from what we imagine. You know? Like, money is a surprisingly recent phenomenon. You know how you go to the store, you have dollar bills, or you just pay for something on your phone or whatever. Cash App, PayPal, all the rest. Obviously, the electronic forms of money are very recent because, you know, electronics are pretty recent. But back in the day, you wouldn't carry coinage on you, usually. Took me seconds. I was starting Minecraft up. Use the sandstone usage suggestions. Ah, very cool. Yeah, no problem. It's, you know, I just wasn't going to be able to ban that guy probably until the race was done. You know, when you think about, like, I don't know, everybody thinks of the Roman Empire, so I guess I could just use that as an example. You know, very easy one to use. Or you could go back to Assyria, Babylon, and sort of all the city-states that were coexisting in the Fertile Crescent. First of all, climate was way different. That's another topic, but they didn't use money for their transactions. They used a theoretical version of money that would be really different from how we now conceptualize it. When you say, like, something costs $5, the $5 itself is an object, right? You could hand over a $5 bill, or €5, whatever, if you're in Europe, or you could pay on PayPal or Cash App or Venmo or whatever, in which case there is a number that says like €5, $5, that physically moves from your side of things to the other person's side of things. And that's the transaction. And then in exchange, you get the thing. You get whatever it is you're buying. Back in the day, the $5, quote unquote, I guess back in the day it would be shekels. That's the oldest, I think that's the oldest currency still in use. Was just a theoretical number. You didn't have a shekel coin unless you were specifically a administrator for the state who dealt in record keeping. The development of coinage and those gold bars and stuff, that was to measure the movement of stuff. And the shekels, the amount of money, was measured in stuff. So like when the tax man comes around and says, "Oh, you're a peasant, like farmer or whatever. You have your plot of land and you're farming grain. The tax for this year is 2 shekels of stuff, right? Like the tax this year is 2 shekels. You wouldn't like go get a coin. People didn't have coins just as a pedestrian matter of like everyday affairs. You would go to the crops you would harvest. You would get a portion of the crops that you were farming, or whatever it is you did for a living. If you were a leather worker, it would have been leather. If you were a smith, you dealt in metals. And you would get like how much of this is worth 2 shekels, and you would give that to the tax person. And that's how money worked. And this is why myself and many other anthropologists and archaeologists especially will say that barter is a myth, didn't exist, because in order to have a barter economy, you actually have to already have money, just as a theoretical concept, But of course, this is all nerd shit, but it's very interesting to me. That's decent enough placing. So, like, in modern terms, right? You would go to market, right? You would go to, like, the markets back in the day would resemble more so probably some of the bazaars and street markets that you'd see in the Arab world. Very cool places. If you ever go to an Arab country, be sure to spend some time there. Caveat emptor, obviously, there's some guys that'll rip you off, but, it's truly a sight to behold. It's a genuine phenomenon. And, you want to buy something from somebody. You would use the physical object that represented, like, that was equivalent in value, but you weren't dealing in that object. The object itself wasn't the currency, right? So, like, this microphone costs, like, what, $50? Something like that. If I were going to the store in this kind of system, in this money as a theoretical standard of value system, I would pick up my microphone, take it to the store, and they'd say, yeah, this thing costs $50, and I would hand them the microphone because the microphone is worth $50. That's a theoretical standard of value that we would both understand. Like, yes, this microphone is worth $50. And like that, I have paid $50. But the reason that's not barter is because, like, yes, I'm giving up the microphone, but I'm not trading the microphone for something else. I'm dealing in money. It's just that money is represented by an object that isn't like a bill or a coin. Because in this theoretical situation, the reason that you'd be doing this, or like there is no coinage to speak of, really, not at the pedestrian level. Like in ancient Greece or somewhere, if you went in there and plopped down a coin at a tavern, that'd be enough to buy the whole fucking tavern. Like, coinage used to be worth a lot. Like, a really large amount. Or even in the days where you started to see coinage a little bit more, where it starts being reflected more in the material record, by the time that comes around, coinage is still enough to buy, like, a full meal on its own, like a really big meal. Like you go to a tavern in not, you know, ancient Greece, but let's say a little bit after that, ancient Rome. You plop down a coin, even if it's just like a bronze coin, so some of the like less interesting metals. That's enough to buy you your whole ass dinner, you know, just one. And that's sort of where the beginnings of money as a more pedestrian object live. That's where that comes from, kind of. Sorry, that was autistic as fuck. I make no apologies for my autism. I do make apologies for that potentially not being the most interesting to some people. That's just the kind of shit that I read just cuz. Well, let's talk about something autistic that's way more interesting. Minecraft. I enjoyed it. Well, thank you. I'm glad somebody enjoyed it. I've been playing a lot of Minecraft lately. Regular viewers will know about my I was interested in my brother's autistic as well. Gotcha. Okay. Regular viewers will know about my gigantic Minecraft creative mode world, which has actually grown significantly in size since the last time I showed it off, because I'm very active in that creative world. Yes. Yeah, that's right. But for the uninitiated, I have one creative world in Minecraft that I have been spending more than 10 years on. I created that world when I was 14 years old. 10 years ago today. Well, not today specifically, but in 2014, I created this world. Actually, even before that. Yeah, it was before that. When did the 1.7 update come out? Because it was when that update, I think, came out that I created the world. Like, acacia wood and dark oak wood were new things when I created this creative mode world. Because I remember granite, andesite, and diorite had not been added yet. And ever since then, October 2013. Okay, there you go. Then sometime between October 2013 and whenever it was that the 1.8 update came out was when I created that creative world. Just a flat sandstone world. I used the redstone ready preset, and for the longest time, I would just, whenever I wanted to build something, I went to that world, and primarily what I was interested in was building houses, because I really liked having somewhere to be like, oh, okay. Well, first I wanted to build a town, but then also it was really fun for me to be like, oh, I could make this in survival mode. That's cool. And for a long time, until actually I think last year, I mostly just did that. It was just houses. And you know, the occasional structure of like, you know, I built a like Captain America thing. I built a Captain America like pixel art statue. And my dad and I built a giant SpongeBob. I like imported a chunk from another world to, you know, do some goofy stuff there. My dad built a pixel art of Steve on the ground. We built a giant pyramid. Yeah. And all around that, there's a bunch of houses and like ranging from huts to mansions to apartment buildings to row homes. And then something like, I think it was when I started being more interested in public infrastructure, in like city planning and stuff. You know, it was a combination of me watching Adam something on YouTube, you know, shout outs to him, and like playing Sim City or whatever. But I was like, oh, you know what? For a while, something had been feeling kind of off in that world. It had felt kind of dead. And I was like, I wonder why that is. And it's because I had been building a world from my own perception of like what a town or a city looked like. And that was all houses. Because I live in America. There's no such thing as a fucking third place in America. You know, or some shit like that. You go to the suburbs and it's just houses, houses, houses. Nothing to do. And I was like, oh, you know what? I don't usually do this because I don't have any like ready-made concepts for like non-residential buildings. I should start building non-residential stuff. And so I did. I built, I think I started with farms. Farms were a relatively easy thing for me to build. Then I built, I think I also built a restaurant based on a restaurant that's actually not super far from my house. Thank God my town is more than just houses, houses. Yeah, true. I built a railroad. In fact, before I built this railroad, I had basically done the reverse of importing a chunk into that world. I basically went into NBT editor and I was like, you know what? This world would be a lot more interesting if it had the regular Minecraft terrain generation. Because I think I want that. I've had enough of, like, the sandstone flatness is just, it feels like it's dead. So after much frustration with the NBT editor figuring that out, I managed to get it so that there's this big area of like the sandstone flat world, and it's surrounded by the default Minecraft world generation. And I did this in 1.19, I think. 1.19 or 1.20, so that you'd have the modern cave systems, which I would later take advantage of. And so I basically got to work being like, okay, now I have a new sense of purpose in this creative world. I don't want to just build houses, although I still do want to do that. I want to make the world genuinely feel alive. So I'm going to build houses. I'm going to build non-residential buildings. I'm going to build apartment buildings. I'm going to build a railroad connecting the sandstone region to these other parts of the Minecraft world. I'm going to experiment with different styles. I'm going to build houses of all different sizes and stuff like that. I'm going to start, like, basically trying to make each house look better. And it makes me happy. That world makes me very happy to revisit and to work on. I built an underground section. I built some stuff on a beach. I built some stuff in a jungle. I built some stuff on the plains and the forest, you know, whatever it is. And, you know, throughout it all, I was periodically building. I developed a kind of a new rule for myself, where, like, okay, once I build 10 residential buildings, I'm going to build one building that's not residential, you know? So, like, oh, that wasn't a mushroom. That was a red shell. You know, build a bunch of houses, build an apartment building, and then build, like, a restaurant or a factory or a farm or like, in one specific case, I built a funny office building. Any chance you'll do that on stream and also your dad plays with you in your town as well? We're fucking brothers at this point. That's true. Brother from another mother. Yeah, it's not super often, but my dad and I do sometimes play together in the creative world. He actually built an airport. He built a runway, an airstrip. And him and I have both talked about the next time we play, we got to build like an air traffic control tower. Because that would be sick. You know? And you know what? Even though there's no such thing as an airplane in Minecraft, that runway could have a practical purpose. Because you could use an elytra. We're so big brain. Yeah, you know what? Maybe, the next stream I do, I think I want to stream Mario Kart up to and including the stream where I plan to review that debate between Destiny and Dennis Prager. And then after that, maybe I'll switch to the Minecraft creative world for a bit. Or just /fly. I don't think /fly is a command that works in vanilla Minecraft. I could be wrong, though. It's been a long time since I experimented with commands and command blocks. I also developed a rule. There's like 2 rules that I have for building houses and stuff in my creative world that I will only very rarely break or like alter. The first of them is that I build 10 residential buildings and then I build 1 non-residential thing, you know, like industry, commerce, whatever, to make the place feel more alive. But then apart from that, I also, like, every time I'm building the, like, houses and stuff, one of those has to be a multifamily unit. So either I build a section of row homes, like townhouses, and that counts as 1 building, or I build an apartment building, and that counts as 1 building for me. And so you get this nice mixed density feel, where it's like, yeah, you know, you have these freestanding houses, and then you have townhouses and apartments. And in fact, I also, one of the places I'm most proud of, like, changing and altering and building in, uh, I'm excited. Well, thank you. I'm glad this is exciting. It's very exciting for me, too, to talk about this and to, like, again, that sense of direction. It's, like, legitimately, I'm doing the 5-year plan, but in Minecraft, you know? The sense of direction is very fun to have. There was a part of the Minecraft world where I went, where it's a swamp. It's a swamp biome. And swamps in Minecraft can be very easy to build in, or they can be very hard to build in, with very little in between, right? Because they could be mostly above water swamps, where there's like, it's just really flat, and that's a great place to build, right? Even still, it looks kind of ugly, but there's also the kind of swamp that I ran into, which is the swamp where you have some sections of, like, really flat area, but mostly you have, like, these spurious patches of grass in the water, a lot of lily pads, a lot of really shallow water. That's kind of hard to build in. But I did, I made it work. I managed to, first of all, like, focus on the flat parts, and then I also, like, decided to build things in such a way that it was compatible with them partially being, like, above the water. So I make it so that it would look like they were kind of on stilts a little bit. And I made sure to also build plenty of bridges and pathways so that it wasn't like this awkward survival Minecraft-esque thing where you have to jump in the water to get from one place to the other. I had problems with the swamp recently. Water kept flooding my ice boat racetrack too quickly to get from place to place. Oh, that sucks. Yeah, lots of bridges, lots of like building stuff where there was a little bit of land and then just sort of supporting it in the water with stuff. Not from the perspective of it actually needs that. Obviously, it's Minecraft. You just have some floating up there. But just from the perspective of making it look realistic enough to be a live environment. It's flat, though. I'll admit that. Yeah. I mean, why you don't have to say I'll admit it. You know, it's not like an argument that we're having. You know. I've also gotten a lot better at coming up with, like, original design concepts for houses. I'll obviously still take inspiration from a lot of places, but what I used to do a lot was, like, refer to some YouTube tutorials and then, like, find one design that I really liked and then do kind of variations on that. And then also I would go to, like architectural websites which had, like, blueprints and stuff. And there would be some houses that I, like, routinely went to in survival mode that I would also build. I've gotten a bit better at taking inspiration and, like, applying it a lot more loosely, a lot more freely, you know? I think I've genuinely grown my artistic eye, and my autistic eye, thank you, from playing Minecraft creative mode. Yes, I got the correct thing there. I'm using this here. This is probably the best place I can use it. Out of here. Mushroom. I just have a server owner who makes ground flat with world edit. Oh, okay. Fourth place. Quite lucky that I live in Netherlands. Otherwise, that obviously wouldn't be as easy. Yeah. 8 players. So, you know, shoutouts to the creative mode Minecraft world. One thing I've also done is taken things kind of like using that as a blueprint for survival mode worlds. I have a there's one survival world that I have in unmodded, like vanilla Minecraft, that I go to frequently, where I build usually smaller houses for myself when I'm moving around. And there's a modded survival world where I build usually bigger houses. And I actually did something recently where I for the last couple, I went into the creative mode Minecraft world, and I decided, like, okay, I'm building this house for my survival world. What do I want it to look like? And I build it first. I take inspiration from one of the other designs, and then build it. And then that's like, it's like a, instead of me having to build something on the fly that would probably not look as good, it's like I've built this luxurious villa. I went for the content. And that's like, I always feel like whenever I can do that, I'm living large in the survival world, you know? I don't know, like, I don't know the degree to which I, like, want to... Oh, no, I didn't get my item. I don't know if I want to show off my survival world at any point, because I already did the live streams where I played survival Minecraft. And I feel like that's kind of good for encapsulating a survival Minecraft experience. Unless I want to do Nether survival. That could be interesting. That might be a good YouTube series. I just kind of use that. It looks like nobody really dodged, so that's good for me, I think. Yes. I'm gonna try to hold these 2 mushrooms for the rest of the race, basically. I'll use 1 here. I theoretically could have used it there, but I want to save this for the gap jump, which I'm going to do here. Yes! And I steal 2nd place. I hope you'll get harassed by a ghast so that you'll have your fun ruined by cat noises. That adds to the fun for me. I actually really like the fact that the ghast is just cat noises. Also, future me, clip that race ending. That was sick. What really, the thing I think I'm actually the most afraid of in the Nether are the hoglins and the piglin brutes. Those guys hit fucking hard. Anyways. What's coming up? Toad's Factory. Alright. It's been, like, more than 2/3 of the time that I'm streaming. I think I should get to the thing that's in the title of the stream now. And that is the directly, like, politics related thing of the day. I mean, I guess housing policy is also politics and stuff, but this is elections, electoral politics, which I, am obligated to cringe at because I'm a socialist, and, electoral politics are cringe sometimes, but at the same time they are important for, well, I think for kind of obvious reasons. Regardless. Hoglins eat you into lava, those can suck. Honestly, if we're talking about how annoying they are, Hoglins are more so than Piglin brutes. That's probably true, yeah. But anyways, the elections in Germany. German federal elections have not happened yet, I think. They have yet to occur. But I think you actually mentioned in 1v3 that there were some regional German elections coming up where the AfD, the German neo-Nazi party, gained quite a bit of ground. The elections, oh baby, yeah, true. Who amongst us does not enjoy a good segment about electoral politics? In the state of Thuringia, Thüringen, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I know that's like kind of how it is in German. They had the elections for that state, and I think that's not too far from Berlin if I'm remembering like geography stuff correctly. But anyways, the far right party unfortunately won in a blowout victory. In terms of like who got the most vote share. If I look at this electoral map here, from Europe Elects and from Stats for Lefties, I have both of these up. De Linke, the left party, which was previously the most represented party, with 34%, I think that says. No, 31%. 31% of the vote in the 2019 elections dropped to just 12% of the vote this time. Meanwhile, the AfD went from 23% of the vote last election to 30% this time. So they are now the single largest party in the state of Thuringen, in Thuringia. I'm just going to say Thuringia. And then the second largest is the CDU. That's the Christian Democrats. Basically just the far right, but like kind of not. They're the center right party, but they pal around with the far right a lot. Which went from 22% to like 24.5%. SPD lost a little bit of support, but they didn't have much to begin with, from 8% down to 7%. Green lost support from 5% down to 4%. FDP, which is the Liberal Party, lost support from 5% down to 1%. And BSW is a new party, another far-right party, that has 16% of the vote. That got 16% of the vote this election. Those are the vote totals. I just kind of read those out. I'm sure if this is a segment, I'll show the vote chart that I'm referring to. You know, where all the vote totals are compared to last election. But I want to talk about like what this kind of represents. Like why am I talking about this? You know, because you can be damn sure that I don't talk about state elections in the United States, right? That's because I think like this is not good. It has some significant implications for the rest of Germany, and there's something I want to say specifically about East Germany for this as well, because I know that Thuringia is in East Germany, what used to be was it the GDR or whatever? Communist East Germany, Communism, Vuvuzela, that Germany, that one. So obviously, the far right is gaining ground in Germany. They have been for a while. There's no indication to believe that they won't continue to. And of course, now that there's a, you know, in addition to the AfD, which is just, you know, Nazis, ultranationalists and stuff, now you also have the BSW, which is a Nazbol party. They're sort of like the sort of red-brown alliance type of people, where they're like, oh yeah, you know, we believe in social conservatism but economic populism, which means they're actually probably more like the Nazis than the AfD is. Because the AfD only does the nationalism bit. The BSW is, I think, still trying to appeal to the like pretend populism part of it, or like the economic part of it. That is to say. The implications of this, like I said, far right is gaining ground. They will likely continue to, because in Germany, the left, the Die Linke is kind of a joke. The Green Party is a joke. The Social Democratic Party is a centrist party. There's no real left, like, there's no real representation of left of center policy prescriptions, because that would start to threaten the bottom line of liberal capitalism. And the reason that these fascist parties are able to take advantage of that is because there's no counter narrative from the left at an institutional level. You know, in the most literal sense, this is capitalism in decay. You will sometimes, if you're in lefty circles ever, you will hear the phrase, fascism is capitalism in decay. That is exactly what's happening here, and that's where East Germany comes in. East Germany, everybody knows, was much poorer on average than West Germany in the sort of Cold War period. Right? And with the unification of Germany in the late 80s, I think the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. So with the reunification of Germany in 1989, 1990, everybody thought, oh, this is great. Germany's going to be reunified. You know, the problem's going to be solved, right? That's not what ended up happening. Because the West Germans were really fucking snooty libs, or a lot of the, you know, the parties that represented West Germany were a lot of snooty libs and, like, reactionaries. They hated, there was a lot of leftover Cold War campism where West Germany fucking hated East Germany. They thought they were way worse than them. Basically, think about how like some European countries will think of migrants, about how, like, more reactionary liberal types will talk about immigrants being, like, I don't know, trash, and how, like, you know, the native-born nationals are better or whatever. That's kind of the attitude, like, that's analogous to the attitude that existed between West Germany and East Germany. They hated each other, and you know, East Germany viewed West Germany as, like, basically an oppressor state. They weren't wrong to do so, right? Because West Germany definitely underinvested in East Germany to a massive degree, right? Part of that was because of, like, the leftover social disdain, but a lot of it was also because it was just more profitable to keep investing in West Germany. This is part of how capitalism creates inequalities, is that, like, the preference goes to where the wealth already is, because that's where you know the wealth is going to be. That's where more wealth can get generated exponentially. So the gap between East Germany and West Germany, however much it's close, has never really been addressed. That disparity has always remained. Capitalism has failed the people of Eastern Germany, right? Suffice it to say, in a broad sense, right? You can look at an income map. You can look at, like, an income and wealth map, like an inequality map of Germany based on, like, city or county, and it lines up almost perfectly with the former boundaries of East and West Germany, even down to the neighborhoods in Berlin. So people in East Germany had a lot of anger, a lot of unresolved anger. And they were looking for a place to put it politically. Or rather, East Germany, as, like, a political entity, was looking for a place to put that anger, right? And capitalism had failed them. What they perceived to be socialism had failed them. So they decided to try a third way. Third positionism mentioned, when people... like, when capitalism is in decay and people don't go to socialism, they go to fascism. When you can't appeal to the rising tide lifting all boats, because it hasn't been in East Germany, what do you appeal to? The nation, the state, the Volk. This is exactly the strategy that Hitler used in the 1920s and 30s. That's why it was so successful back then, and that's why it's so successful now. The same problems inherent to capitalism exist now as existed in the 1920s and 30s, and it is becoming relevant in the same fucking place again, in Germany. You know? History doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. So That's I think what we're seeing reflected in this state election. And I know that's a lot for me to take from us what would mostly be considered a single data point. First of all, it's two data points, get wrecked, because there's another election. But then also, it's more than just the one state compared between 2019 and now. It is that state as well as the rest of Germany compared between now and I think the past. God, when was the AFD, like, when did they become relevant? It was something. It was about the time that the Syrian refugee crisis started, when a lot more migrants started coming to Europe, right? Because for sure it's hard to handle a lot of migrants, but then also like it gave reactionaries an excuse, and it revealed a lot of the economic tension that was already there. Hello, Dalibre. Welcome to chat. Glad to have you here. Also, globalize my agenda. Welcome back to chat. So, in case it seems like, wow, he just mentioned one election and then went on a whole rant about how this is indicative of a broader historical trend. Isn't that a bit much? There is more to substantiate this. Yeah, welcome to Germans repeating history. Mustache Man is back, and he is just as angry as ever. You know? We've seen this in various other countries as well. Friend code, it's in the command list there. It's FC. Although that doesn't give the friend code for this account. It gives the friend code for my other account, the one that I use for CTGP. What was I gonna say? It was something about. I think it was just gonna be reiterating something that I already said. That like this economic anxiety or whatever. A lot of people refer to economic anxiety or something. Went to the store in my town recently. The cashier refused to speak American. World's going to hell recently. SMH. True. That's so real. But yeah, the sort of the unresolved problems of capitalism will lead people to a place of profound despair and anger. We've seen this in a lot of European countries where austerity fucking hollowed out economies. At best, it sort of left people on more uneven footing, right? In a country like France or Sweden, austerity politics hit hard, but ultimately those countries still have like pretty well-functioning civil societies, strong unions, and whatever. Like life is still all right there. But for other countries like Britain, austerity destroyed them. And you have varying degrees in between. And that creates a lot of despair and anger among people. And when the sort of capitalist system is very intent on maintaining itself, as all systems are, it will try to redirect and absorb critiques whenever possible. Mostly through, mass media, that being a new invention of the 20th and 21st centuries. So, that critique, that anger, that despair generated by austerity politics and an economic system that fundamentally beats down the working class, that hollows out civil society, that channels wealth upwards and makes people's lives absolute shit, that gets absorbed and redirected. News outlets and politicians and pundits who are very friendly with a lot of business people, and in fact, those business people themselves sometimes will go and say, okay, shit, what do we deflect people to? I know, migrants. Very easy issue. People have a lot of irrational tendencies, reactionism, etc. And so, the sort of anti-migrant sentiment and the anti-Semitism and whatever else, the xenophobia, becomes at the behest of really fucking rich, like, business owners, the stupid man's anti-capitalism. So, people get to have something to feel angry about. People start galvanizing as like part of a political movement, and the business people get to keep sitting comfortable because they know that they've just misdirected the entire population into talking about something that will not fix anything. Also, Delibre, thank you very much for the follow. And we're watching that happen right now. You know? To put it in a very simple recap, you know, with Germany as an example, East Germany was hollowed out by their time in the Warsaw Pact, and then they reintegrated with the rest of Germany. They failed to fix that problem because of the perverse incentives created by free market capitalism. And as a result, they're now fucking pissed. And they're looking for someplace to put it. And they found immigrants as a very convenient place because all the business people want to still keep doing business the way they have. Getting closer to the Stormtrooper stream? Yeah, for real. After this race, can you give me your CGGP FC? Oh, you have the CGGP FC. That's it. That's the FC that you got there is the one for CGGP. The one that I'm using on this license right now is different. It says you're not on WeFi because I'm not. I'm on Retro WFC. So the one you have is the CTGP friend code. I'm not on CTGP right now is the thing. This is Retro Rewind. Is that like a My Stuff mod? No, Retro Rewind is its own distribution pack. It has its own channel and everything. But yeah, I can duck out for a minute and give you the friend code for that. There we go. This is the one I use for, oh, wait, actually, I meant to hit B, not A, there. But yeah, expect to see more elections like this in Germany, especially because it seems the far right is getting more and more normalized in Germany as time goes on, and the German government is continually fixate. Yeah, there we go. That's the FC for this license. And make a license for Retro Rewind. You don't have to. I just prefer to like keep things discreet for myself. The way Retro Rewind works, you can have a license that you use for both CTGP and Retro Rewind. Your VR will just be different on CTGP from Retro Rewind. Like if you play on CTGP, your VR and Retro Rewind doesn't change. If you play on Retro Rewind, your VR and CTGP doesn't change because they have different systems. But if you want to, you know, go for it. Anyways. Yeah, through the entrenchment of the far right in German society, in German government too. Do the friends carry over or no? They do if you have the same friend codes. So the friends carry over. And as Germany, like, the more Germany doesn't like address any of the problems in a like with austerity politics, the more the far right is going to gain ground. The more the far right is normalized through Germany's insistent support on Israel as well. We might just see, you know, Nazi Germany 2 AFD Boogaloo. Alright, I'm gonna go back in. What's this other account got? Honestly, I don't know why people care so much about immigrants. Everyone living here is an immigrant unless you're native. True. Well, that's in America. There's like we're the biggest in the EU. Yes, Hungary. No, of course not. It's Germany. Yeah, that's true. In fact, it's economically irrational. The anti-immigrant hatred is a fundamentally irrational thing. You can look at economic charts and statistics about economic growth, the creation of wealth, and all sorts of like quality of life metrics. Immigrants are a huge benefit to the societies towards which they immigrate. Migrants in Germany, huge benefit to German society, huge benefit to the German economy. Migrants in America, huge benefit to American society and the economy, right? This is the case for any country where people move in, because those people are fully grown, for in large part, they're fully grown people that you don't have to go through the full trouble of raising from childbirth. They're in a lot of cases they're ready to work. They don't need as much education. It's like a cheat code, honestly, for like way easier labor, right? And of course, obviously, a lot of businesses exploit them by paying them way lower wages than they're technically allowed to do, and they just hold the threat of deportation over their heads. But they're also, because they have so little representation in media and government, because they are so on the margins of society, they represent a very easy target. Because also in a lot of cases that they haven't fully integrated yet. They're kind of, you can still kind of tell. Right? Does that make sense? So, when news media outlets that are owned privately or whatever are starting to sort of feel the heat, when they're looking out for their bottom line and stuff like that, when business people are like, I don't like all these left-wing protests or whatever, like, whenever the calls come for like economically progressive policy making, for things that would threaten the profit margins, for things that might lead to, workers having higher wages, getting more benefits, having more representation on the corporate board, they turn up the anti-immigrant rhetoric. And in fact, they're just doing that constantly as a way to sort of try to prevent people from like reaching that point of realizing their interests in the first place. Although for the layperson, a lot of hating immigrants is just about perceived cuckoldry. As dumb as that sounds. Because that's for the most part, that's how it's marketed to people. Like, they're gonna come here and fuck your women or whatever. The biggest party in the EU is also the biggest party in Germany, but I doubt the rest of the EU, besides Hungary, will like far-right Germans in the EU pulling the strings. They probably won't, but the EU, the only thing that the EU can really do is decide to give $1 squidrillion to farmers anyways. The EU can't do a ton. Although I guess the EU could do a lot of damage when it comes to migrants and stuff. Like, seriously, if you think the United States has some bad anti-immigrant politics, holy cow, you do not know what's going on in Europe. Like, in the United States, we'll sort of we'll create conditions that would lead to migrants disproportionately dying. In Europe, they'll straight up kill them themselves. Like, the border guards in Europe will go on patrol boats in the Mediterranean and, like, watch boats full of migrants capsize and then just let them all drown at sea. Fucking inhuman behavior. But the nationalism runs deep in Europe. Funnily enough, it's possible that the nationalism can get in the way of the far right and their political objectives. It's not super likely because the far right movement is very international. Far right people in one country versus another will sound basically the same. But it is possible that through a lot of Europeans just really hating Germans, then the German far right will have a limited ability to act in the EU Parliament, which would be very funny. So that's the outcome I want to see happen. Yeah, this guy who knows European politics better than me says that there's some friction between AfD and BSW, even though they're both far-right parties. Guys, remember, far-right parties fucking hate each other because they're all idiots. Fascism is international, it's funded by capital, but that doesn't stop the far-right from all hating each other for various different reasons. So it's probably you're going to get a AFD and CDU in a coalition government in Thuringia. Oh, that's so true. Yeah, it is. It is so real. I mean, like, you know, take it from me, take it from 1v3. Just look at the Netherlands. The tendency of far right parties to fucking fight with each other constantly has saved the Netherlands' ass on like 3 or 4 occasions at this point. Because there keep being new far right parties that get elected to the government and they keep hating each other. And they keep not getting anything done and like letting the government collapse because they all hate each other so much. It's really funny. To me, anyways. Yeah, competitive fascism. This is why, like, as much as obviously I'll disagree with Destiny on a lot of shit, this is why something that Destiny said will, like, always stick with me, which is that the, you know, lefty infighting on the left is mostly contained to, like, Twitter online, right? Like, that's mostly where that stuff lives. But then you take a look at infighting on the right, and they're doing it in the halls of power, in government. Like, the right tears themselves apart at an institutional level. You know, the infighting on the right is so much more consequential than the infighting on the left, you know? It's a big hiccup, you know, it can cause some pretty big hiccups in political movements on the left as well, but it's mostly at the grassroots level that all that stuff happens. You know? Meanwhile, fucking right-wing parties will get into parliament and then spend all of their time in parliament, like, talking shit about the other fascist parties in parliament and, like, getting nothing done. Which is great for us, you know? I have made new coalition government. New coalition government or government collapse again? Government collapse again. So I guess that's the that's like the silver lining is that fascist parties hate each other. The worrying bit is that because the fascists are coalition building with the right, the center right, what is nominally the center right, funnily enough, liberals will have better chemistry with fascists than other fascists, right? Fascist parties constantly at each other's throat. Liberal parties, in Europe especially, but also in the United States, liberal parties will fucking trip over themselves to make concessions to fascists. The only way that fascists can get anything done is if their partners are liberals. Because even though there's a theoretical ideological opposition, liberals are so civility pilled that it's so easy to just say, like, hey, if you really care, you should make concessions to us here. And the liberals will just do it instantly. No discussion. Sometimes you don't even need to do that much. Just look at the way Macron behaves in France. You know? Depending on how much liberals hate the left. But I've said enough about that, you know. Far-right parties are gaining ground in Germany. They're going to probably continue to gain ground because, you know, this is a product of capitalism literally being in decay. Where'd you get the trans Funky Kong from? On TalkDom, the custom skins page has a lot of custom stuff. I just looked up the trans Funky Kong custom skin on Google, and it, like, there was a TalkDom page that had it. Even though I don't play Funky Kong very often, I love the trans Funky Kong. I didn't mean to let go of that, but okay. A fake item box in 4th. Thank you, game. Very cool. Yay, I got the funniest outcome where I throw my fib forward a tiny distance and it actually hits somebody. I'm gonna... Okay. You go ahead. 3 mushrooms. Oh, the shock hasn't happened yet. Ugh, I'm probably gonna get shocked. Aren't I? Yeah, okay. Well... Sorry, I should continue with the like last bit that I have for this. German far right gaining ground. They're going to continue gaining ground because this was literally caused by capitalism being in decay and like that being the sort of nationalism and reactionary politics being the only thing that can really motivate people in politics, because the whole rising tide lifts all boats thing wasn't ever really true, but now has stopped even having the appeal in the first place. I mean, it's technically, like, the rising tide lifts all boats thing. There's a kernel of truth to it, but it will inevitably lift some boats a lot more than others. That creates the inequality that leads to capitalism being in decay. So as a result of that, reactionary politics. And that's where you get these sorts of movements from. That's where you can sort of predict these elections from. I think I said in the past that the AfD is going to be a massive force. They're probably going to be the most prominent force in German politics. If there's no, like, socialist movement to match it. Because, like I said, capitalism in decay. If you don't have that counter-narrative, they're just going to go for the reactionism. But if I make that a segment, future me end it there. I think I've said all I want to say on the issue. And I will stop at the risk of rambling. Oh, boy. Oh, this was made by Spy Kid? This is sick. Which really sucks for concentration camps in Ukraine. Yeah. Yeah. I actually don't know what the German far-right thinks of Ukraine. There are some far-right parties in, like, Central Europe and Eastern Europe that really like Putin. There are a lot of, far-right parties in Western Europe. Some of them really don't like Putin. I do? Oh, okay. That's what they talked about a bit on the Dutch news. Oh, really? So is the AfD is, I take it, like, pro-Putin, pro-Russia? That would only make sense. Because, Russia is very active in funding a lot of far-right parties and political movements in Europe. In fact, now that I think of it... Plum General, welcome back. We meet again indeed. Come to think of it, actually, maybe all the far-right parties in Europe do like Putin now. I seem to remember there being, like, a couple in maybe, like, Britain that don't like Putin or something. But no, the French far-right really likes him. The Austrian far-right likes him. And, the German far-right. The fucking Czech and Slovak far-right. You got a girlfriend? Good shit, man. I hope you two have tons of fun. I almost died. One of the big 3 reasons why they voted for that party. And you found your copy of Bowser's Inside Story. Sick. Damn, shit is just going your way. That's awesome. One of the 3 reasons why they voted for that party, because they don't like all the aid Germany is giving Ukraine. Okay, yeah, afraid they'll be sucked in even harder the war, not go to war with Russia. Okay, yeah. So the AfD is pro-Putin. Yeah, I guess all the far-right parties are pro-Putin Putin for the most part in Europe. And I know all the far right parties are pro-Israel. Me and my girlfriend are legit the most autistic people ever when we talk about things we like. That's so cute, and I love that for you. That's true. Big W. We're both like Smash Bros, Pokemon, Mario Kart, Danganronpa, Terraria. Bro, you two are fucking made for each other or something. That's cool. This will probably be the last race, or maybe like, yeah, last race. I'll say that. Rainbow Road. Okay, yeah, this is definitely the last race. This track is long as hell, even with only 2 laps. I'm just now remembering there's a shortcut at the beginning. I've never practiced it. I don't know how to do it. It has met in a Discord server, and she said she lived in a city 10 minutes away by accident. That's funny. All right, I'm not doing that. This is a track where being on Mach Bike really helps. That's the best kind of coincidence. I didn't get an item. That's unfortunate. That. Thank you. Better than a mushroom, please. That's better than a mushroom. Oh, baby. The speed of, like, wheelie and like, the turn radius of the Mach Bike. Let's fucking go. That is such a good spot to use that Mega. Look how much time I gained. Holy shit. Look how much time I'm going to gain on these corners, too. Didn't gain as much time because you put a banana there, but that's okay. Who's that up there? It says I'm in second, but I think there's a guy, like, way out in front of both of us. Yeah, look, who is that? Bro just cannot win today. Again, I'd rather have something other than a mushroom. There we go. This time just from the perspective of, like, I want to be able to guard against a red shell. Is this one of the... Oh, okay. 3rd place. Good shit, good shit. Good race. Good game. Very nice. That was good. My throat is raw from how much I talked, but I think that's fine. In fact, that's for me, that's good because I think I said all what I wanted to say. I shared some details of like what I had been reading, some politics and such. Let's see who else is live right now. Lumi. I don't think I'm gonna do that. We're talking about waking and baking for some reason. Okay. I will raid Pluck. He's watching a Super Smash Bros. Tournament right now. If he acknowledges you, tell him John Affordable Housing, the guy that invented affordable housing, sent you. Yeah, see you later. Oh no. Let's raid. Plup. There we go. Raid has been created. Thanks so much for tuning into the stream. I'll be back on Tuesday, I think. Both my streams this week are going to be a little bit later than the usual time because I have prior commitments, but I should still be streaming